types of text fonts or fonts that are among their other uses used for text, and look at how and where they are commonly used. So as a quick review, up here we have a old style, or sometimes called a humanist font. Next to it we have a transitional, and finally at the bottom we have a modern. And when the transitionals came in, no one knew probably that they were transitionals. They weren't called that, but you can see that they have some characteristics in common with both the modern and the old style. They have serifs, but these seem a little bit more technically and precisely drawn. This seems to mimic the style of the pen. Um, so what you should always bear in mind, or one thing to bear in mind, is that there isn't always a clean distinction in the fonts you use. So this is a font that, well, it could be a little bit ambiguous whether it's a modern, or rather a transitional, or an old style font. It seems to tip a hat to pen techniques, is almost like the start of a pen stroke at there. And it has fairly regular and precise serifs, and it has a G without a ball on it. And that's just fine. You can think of a font like this as whatever you want. Most people, it's a font in this case called Galliard, sitting next to Garamond. Most people would consider Galliard a old style because of those brush qualities and because of its unballed tail on the G there. But, you know, it is somewhere in between. And if you really get down into type categorization, deeper than I care to get, there are hundreds and hundreds of different, or at least hundreds of different categories that you could put different fonts into. But the fact of the matter is some of them are going to be a little bit ambiguous and a little bit in between two styles. And not everything fits in a neat bucket. Where are old styles used? Well, because they have a handmade quality, they're often brought into places where you want a little bit of an elegant touch. They can communicate that. So for invitations, if you don't want something as over the top as a script or as hard to read as a script, a old style can be a nice font to use to communicate something just a little bit personal, or a little bit organic, or a little bit homemade, or any of those sorts of qualities because of the nature of the letters. One of the uses that seemed most against what these fonts are used for was a version of Garamond was actually Apple's signature font for a decade or more, and here it is in use on a keyboard box. So transitionals are the other category, sort of in between the old style and the modern. It does have a bracketed serif, but the serif does not feel particularly pen drawn. They do tend to have a bulbous ear on the G. But as with other things, it's not always clear, or it's not always super consistent which is which. So here I have Publico, which is a font I'm very fond of, next to good old reliable Times Roman. And Times Roman has a G without a flare on it, and it has a slightly smaller X height in this case than the G. And as you recall from the other video, X height is the height of lowercase letters. Most lowercase letters, the I has a dot that goes above the X height. So it has some things in quality, but most people I think would consider Times Roman to be a transitional font on balance, if they put it in those two categories. Where are these used? Well, near and dear to my heart are editorial projects. That's where I've spent most of my career, is in magazines and newspapers. And I would say transitionals are the most common type to have for running copy on a page. In fact, Times Roman itself was originally designed for the Times of London. Here's a transitional for a nice kind of modern book cover. And here it is on a website, also a news website. And then finally, we have modern with the unbracketed serifs and the thin, almost pretend they're not there serifs. And here I have just a couple of versions of Bodoni and also Dido. They vary a little bit. This version of Bodoni is almost verging on transitional with that just barely bracketed, but this font is marketed and it's almost verging on old style with that hand-drawn looking serif almost. But it is sold as a Bodoni. That's the name on the box, and that's what you get if you buy it. But these are probably both purer versions. So that one has, on that one, just a little bit of a bracket as well. So there are things that make every specific design not 100% true to its source. And where are these used? Well, these are used in fashion, places where you want a little bit of elegance. They tend to be used big. I think they're much harder than other fonts to use at text sizes, but you have to make sure that you have a version of the font that is optimized for use at a smaller size. So this one with its thicker serifs would probably be, and its relatively thicker stroke, would probably be the most successful at text sizes, whereas these would be a little bit harder to use unless you know that you have very precise printing. These versions are optimized especially for display. You can notice how skinny the skinny part of that stroke is compared to the thick part of the stroke. This is a font that literally could not and is never meant to be used at a text size because it is exaggerating the contrast, and the same is true of this one as well for the Harper's Bazaar. And both are using these fonts for at least some of the display type on these covers as well. And there it is on a spread and on a book cover.